So we will call to order our,
Apologies.
you guys all set?
Yep.
All right, then we'll call to order our special September 21st, 2023 meeting. The first item on the agenda is to review and approve the minutes from our last meeting. Has everyone had an opportunity to review them? Are there any comments, questions? There being none, would someone like to,
I couldn't find the minutes.
you couldn't find the minutes?
They were on the Google Drive somewhere, I guess. I couldn't find them, but that's okay. I'm only one person.
Well, actually, as a point of order, Chris and I had a discussion today, and going forward, although everything is in the Drive is a wonderful tool, and it's an awful tool. So everything will be emailed as well, and then it will be put in the Drive. But we will email out all of the documents for our review, as well as our agendas and minutes going forward. I think that one, we're all busy. Yes?
And the link to the drive?
Yes, we can put the link in
Very
it.
helpful, thank you.
And the documents will be in different places in the Drive, so we could try to put many links in, but then your email might get kicked back for spam with too many links. We'll see how many documents we have each time. But we will be doing that going forward. John, do you want a minute to look at a copy of them?
No, that's okay. That's okay.
All right. So would anyone care to make a motion to approve the minutes from our September 11th meeting?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay,
Abstaining, I wasn't here.
we'll approve those minutes. So next, Chris, review and sign bills. I believe everyone has in front of them a copy of our bill from the Community Preservation Coalition. This is our annual membership dues.
Yeah, so this is the dues for the annual membership. Obviously, the coalition provides a lot of support and kind of background informational purposes for the committee. We use their website extensively and kind of researching the nitty-gritty of the details, as well as have some staff support from them that we can reach out to for certain circumstances if needed. The amount this year is for $3,500.
Anyone have any questions for Chris about our membership or comments? That's a bill we typically pay. Is there a motion to approve paying that bill?
I make a motion that we approve the coalition dues of $3,500.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor of paying our Community Preservation Coalition dues of $3,500? Please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? We'll pay our bill. Okay, next, the reason we are here, the fire apparatus project application. Hopefully everyone, I apologize that it was Thursday by the time I found it and sent it, but if you found it on page 12, you've had a chance to review the application. Time for comments, questions. Chris, is there anything more about it you'd like to share?
Yeah, so I did, you'll see, we did packets tonight as well, so you'll see those at your desk. I printed the eligibility application as well, which was approved at the previous meeting. But just as reference, if you wanted to review those materials again, I did provide the funding application, as well as we received a letter from the fire department detailing some of the historic preservation criteria. That was a question that was brought up at the last meeting on this, and they have some responses to that in terms of acknowledging those criteria, and that they'll include that in their proposal. So we've reached out to a number of other communities. I know in the fire department letter, they note a number of communities that have done similar projects. I've reached out to a few of those, trying to get some feedback, and I'm looking forward to hearing back from them. Some of them are a little bit more responsive than others, but we're still working through to get some more information from them. I've also included draft warrant language for review as well tonight.
Question.
Ed?
Was Canton on the list? They had the last project. Last year they approved for a 1925 American La France fire engine restoration.
I'd have to look back to the letter, the one that the fire department identified. I didn't identify Canton, but I'd be happy to reach out to them as well and get any lessons learned.
It was, okay. Yeah, and just to note, theirs was purely restoration, and it was $198,000 was requested, and that CPC decided to only partially fund it with 168. So, don't know what the story behind that one is. Unfortunately, going to the Canton site, they didn't have any working materials to speak to what was going on. They just had it as an item that went to for town meeting.
Did town meeting approve it?
I'm assuming yes, because they got onto the project list on the coalition website.
Oh, thank you for this letter with me. I'm reading it quickly. It's the first I've seen it, but thank you for this, responding to the questions about the Secretary of the Interior standards. That's at the bottom of your stack of papers, if you haven't had a chance to just look at it yet. But I appreciate this.
Yeah, can we just have a moment to just read through it because, or call out points since, hit the drive today.
Yeah,
Right. So,
stated today.
yeah. I mean, I appreciate that it's there. I'm just, in terms of a timing perspective, we need a moment to digest this. I think for me personally, as I'm kind of reading and talking out loud at the same time, for me, the CPC has to follow what Chapter 44B says, right, in terms of restoration, and that's why in the last meeting I was focusing on, well, they say that it's got to conform to these standards, right, and we don't know how those standards get applied, right, we're not experts in that space, and that's why there are other entities that do that. So I think what, I guess at a glance here, now what I'm thinking is, so we're saying here, we agreed to follow and comply with the requirements for the restoration as noted here. How, it just seems like it contradicts with the language for the warrant article relative to parade quality. So how can we just massage that to work from like the legalese of what we have to follow? Certainly this is not, to me, in my mind, this is not about like, is this project worth it? Is this a worthy thing to do? It's, for me, it's clear. This is a historic item in if the historic commission says yes, and if we presume that the answer is gonna be yes, then, and if truly you have all the materials, I'm pointing to Gail as the historic commission representative, that if your commission believes that this to be true information, that it is a historic asset in our community, that it should be on the local register, then with that understanding, then the next step is, well, how can we use CPA monies to fund what work needs to get done? So then I look at, okay, last time we talked, and I brought it up about the acquisition aspect of it, and through my readings since our last meeting, acquisition comes with another checkbox, which is that there's a historic preservation restriction. So I don't know if you want to, in the timing, to actually go down that path for acquisition, because that triggers you using CPA monies for acquisition. You got to have the preservation. And I know we're trying to work this in a timing perspective, so I don't know if there's an opportunity that the transportation piece is not funded by CPA. Maybe that's something through you, Chris, if you have the information, or through our guests that are present here too, can answer that gap of, if we needed to, could the $7,000 in transportation not be covered by CPA? because of the acquisition, and I know that it was a gift, but we're trying to cover transportation, and that's the acquisition checkbox.
Yeah, and so in terms of our discussions with the coalition, they described, obviously it's the discretion of the CPC, but they kind of talked about how certainly the transportation of the vehicle to Shrewsbury is part of the acquisition, even though it's a gift. And, obviously any kind of legal fees or anything associated with that would be covered in the acquisition, but the transportation is a piece as well, being that, or could be considered, I should say, could be considered by the CPC part of the acquisition, being that it's the only way to get the vehicle back to Shrewsbury for its intended use. So it's part and parcel with that acquisition and allowable in that way.
Okay.
But again, I'll defer to the CPC if that.
That was my understanding of the conversation with the coalition as well, that the intent of the donor, as he lays out in this document, is to gift the fire truck to the community to be restored, to be part of our historic assets of the community. But in order to donate it, he needs us to transport it. And Stuart from the coalition felt that made it like closing costs akin to closing costs of a property, that it was an allowable use, that allowed for the acquisition, which therefore makes it allowable under CPC.
Okay. Can I further that?
So I did come out of that conversation feeling that we were okay transporting it.
Yeah. Well, so I'm not questioning whether that's, it was about the acquisition side, like checking that box meant. So the coalition's website talks about the CPA calls for actual preservation restrictions under Chapter 184 of MGL. However, there is another point here that says, in some cases, other means of protecting the public interest can be considered. I'm reading verbatim from the site. The City of Newton has signed a memorandum of understanding with the CPA committee, with the CPC, right, requiring the Historic Commission review and approve any changes to town property. In this case, the fire truck would be town property. So, is that the way forward? So obviously we're seeing this tonight, first time with the letter. We're talking out loud about ideas and how we can make this work. In reading this, that sounds to me like the way we can make it work, to check the acquisition box, protect public monies through hooking in the Historic Commission. Unless there's somebody else has another approach here, I just want to make sure that we're compliant with our CPC duties.
I'm confused. What are we trying, I'm lost.
So 70,000 includes both transportation and parade quality restoration.
Yep.
But to me, it has to break down to two aspects of it. To cover the transportation, you gotta check the acquisition. Acquisition triggers CPA requirements to protect public interest money, public monies. That's typically done through a preservation restriction,
What does that mean, a preservation restriction?
meaning you're not gonna destroy the asset. That it is become a historic asset in perpetuity.
Mhm.
You're not gonna just turn around in 5 years from now and say, that the town doesn't turn around in 5 years from now and say, we don't need it anymore, it's too costly to keep, let's just sell it at a profit. So that's the intent. The point with CPA, generally, when it comes to these assets, is to keep things in perpetuity, to keep open lands that are purchased as open space. Historic assets that are acquired, whether gifted or purchased, that once they become CPA property, that it needs to stay within the community. So that's the acquisition part, and
Do you think that the memo from the donor, which says that his intent is that it be easily accessible and available to towns for the future and retained by the town or related entity in perpetuity, is enough to
See,
satisfy that?
I'm
no,
still-
because those conditions don't, that's just an agreement to get it, but that doesn't end.
What do you think would satisfy it?
I'm still not sure what the issue is. In the sense, your concern seems to be that we're not gonna keep it forever.
it's not my personal concern. I'm looking at what CPA says we need to do in order to fulfill that need, that requirement, right? This is just legalese. What does acquisition mean? Acquisition means you have to have a restriction. But there seems to be another avenue here that the coalition's calling out as an opportunity to still check that
Well,
box.
I mean, are we splitting hairs? We're not, the acquisition is a gift. We're not buying it. We're transporting it. The gift, let's split hairs. The fellow's down in Texas, the equipment's down in Texas. He gifts it to us. It becomes ours, and somewhere in his memo, and I think, the town manager would have to talk about this. He talks about drawing up a legal document to be able to transfer it from them to us. That would be the acquisition, as far as I'm concerned. Okay, we would then own it based on some legal document that we, the town of Shrewsbury, and this guy Tim agree to. So we now own it, but it's in Texas. So we have to transport it here, which has got nothing to do with acquisition cost.
So the $7,000 of transportation is from CPA monies, correct?
Yeah, that's part of the
Okay.
restoration, I guess. That's part of,
That's not restoration.
well, so anytime, if we were to buy the fire engine, say, from some guy in Marlboro, then we couldn't transport it? You're saying, we'd have to pay to transport it here somehow.
I'm not debating whether we should fund it or not. What I'm saying is, in order to satisfy the purpose, it falls on one of the 5 categories that we have, right? Remember the allowable uses chart. Transportation would be in the category of acquisition. That's the connection with acquisition language. So even though it costs 0 for buying it, there's still a cost that has to be, in order to be absorbed it's in that line item, acquisition.
And
Acquisition has rules around that.
I think at this point, the question that Jason is raising, and now that I took off my reading glasses, I could see Mr. Mizikar might have an answer.
Yeah.
But I think the question he's raising is more about the restoration, and that for CPC funds, we have to have a guarantee that it remains a historical asset of the community in perpetuity. So that's kind of the second half. And Mr. Mizikar, you looked like you had something to say to that effect. Come on up.
So a couple thoughts. So I believe Chapter 184 of the general laws applies only to real property and not to chattel property. But if there is a restriction that would be required, whatever that agreement would be, whether it's an MOA with the CPC or something that could be filed with the Commonwealth through historic preservation, we would certainly do that. I mean, we don't object to do that. But again, I'm certainly not well-versed in CPA or historic preservation to know, but my understanding of 184 is it only applies to real property.
Did you
Yeah.
read that the same way, or what do you think?
Well, no, that's certainly why we want to hear from other communities that have done this, so that we can understand from their perspective, especially ones that actually win as far as getting it done, right? And so Canton was just approval, but, as you said, the other communities that have gone down this path, so that we know what is the clear path forward. Again, I'm just bringing these comments up as just another CPC member who is reading what Chapter 44B says, what does the coalition state in the more details of this, looking at examples of other communities that.
Where is
do
that in
this.
44B? What section is that under?
You want me to get back to you so you can continue the discussion?
Sure. And from our historic representative, do you have any thoughts on
I'm
what?
not sure where to start. All I can tell you is that last Thursday, on the 21st, we had a wonderful presentation from the fire department, and from that discussion and presentation and the information that they provided to us, it was very clear the history of that apparatus was, definitely would be deemed historic to the town. Mr. Perna has also done a lot of research and offered that to us as well, the history of it. It has a large provenance in town, so we did accept it as a historic asset, and I believe Mr. Misakar has a email to that regard, and a letter will be following up, a formal letter. So it did pass the historic checkbox. As far as, I have a question for Jason, actually, about the preservation restriction. You had mentioned something about a timeline, that you were concerned, we know that this is a time-sensitive issue. I don't believe that restriction would put a pause on anything that we're trying to do you, right, at this moment? I mean, we could still go forward with the warrant article with maybe change of language that incorporates that, and that would be later on. Am I understanding that correctly? I mean, how would the restriction restrict what we're doing at this time?
I believe through, and again, this is just interpretation of what I'm seeing on the coalition's website. I was hoping that we have some feedback from other communities that have that, but we don't have that present for tonight. I see there's, as anyone else can read this, and anyone viewers at home can read what the coalition has said about preservation restrictions, and that there was this other option of a memorandum of understanding, which Mr. Misakar has commented that would be willing to do so, right? And it sounds to me that that could be the path of least resistance, because that makes it clearer. We know that we have the intent from the seller or from the gifter, right? But I don't see that. I don't think that carries forward any further beyond, to say, oh, this is why CPA monies can be spent, because it's just an agreement to acquire it and
So-
to take property of it.
The coalition is basically saying they're including transportation in acquisition.
Chris, do you have anything you can add? Sorry.
Yeah, in discussion with the coalition, they suggested that the CPC could consider the transportation as, a part and parcel, so essentially a necessary piece of the acquisition. I think as stated, similar to closing costs
Yeah.
of real property. So in this case, the request is for the acquisition and restoration, we can adjust the language of the warrant article if that's more palatable, or in terms of the permanent restriction, I think there's a couple of documents already in place. There's or not already in place, but there's the agreement for the acquisition, which would be produced. And it's indicated that that's gonna require preservation by the town. Separately, we could also approach the Historical Commission and see if, as you had mentioned, a memorandum of understanding with the Historical Commission. I think that would be something that could be fairly easily drafted.
So are you suggesting that the article just separate the $10,000 and $60,000?
I think that's also we heard from the coalition as well as a recommendation.
Okay, I mean, I got no problem with that, if that's what,
Yeah.
Skip, the coalition said we have to have two different warrant articles? Or just identify the acquisition and the restoration separately in the article?
I think it would be that we would separate the acquisition and the restoration.
Okay.
So they would go into essentially separate accounts. Then, if there's a certain amount that's left over after the transportation, that gets returned, and then there's the restoration piece.
So we'd need two warrant articles.
No, just put it in the
Just
language
put
of
it
the
into
article.
separate accounts, but you could,
Oh.
I think we could craft the warrant article as one
That says
that
10
is
and
inclusive.
60, yeah, that's what I was
Yeah,
saying.
10,000 for the acquisition and 60,000
Yeah.
for restoration.
So
If
it would be
that's- that's-
voted on as a package, a package is, okay. When you vote on that warrant article, you're voting on the 70,000. Just specifying that it's 10 going for one and 60 going for the other.
In my opinion, I mean, it's a little more detailed than you need to be in the warrant article. I mean, the regulations of the CPA and the desire of the CPC are well documented and well known. I don't think it would need to be broken out, but there would be no harm in doing that. I won't belabor it, but technically you're tying town meeting's hands, you know, to those two specific things. We like to give them a little discretion in their decision-making. But, you know, for instance, I don't know if there's a for instance, but
I'm not sure that it needs to be broken either, because if you're going to explain the project, and the town meeting is going to know that part of the money is going for acquisition and part of it's going for restoration. So they're either voting on it all, or they're going to vote it down.
Could you just, so it sounds like some people are concerned about it, so could you say for the acquisition and restoration in the article? Just leave it at that.
Well, it says for transportation and restoration.
Whatever.
I'm saying technically it's there, you could change the word transportation to acquisition and restoration. You know, just change that one word technically, I guess.
Before we decide how the warrant article would be worded, perhaps we should determine whether or not we wish to send this
Recommend it.
project forward to a warrant article.
Well, I think we gotta make sure everybody's comfortable that we've got these things addressed before we decide we wanna do it. So we're not here all night going back and forth on this and that. I agree with you, but let's just get the issues out of the way. Well, from what I read on the Department of the Interior, I think it's pretty straightforward what you have to do, and I think it meets the criteria, so I'm not concerned. And if so many other departments or towns did this, it cannot be that, the requirements cannot be that onerous. So I'm comfortable with it.
What do you folks think over here about the Department of Interior requirements of the project? Martha?
I'm very comfortable with it, and I'm also, if it makes it more palatable, I think that transporting it to a place where it can be worked on and restored is also part of the restoration process, rather than the acquisition.
And that's already in place.
And that's in place. I would be comfortable with that interpretation. I don't know if others would be, but I would be.
What if we sent somebody down here to work on it and stay there until it was done and then drive it back up?
You volunteering?
Sure. I'm not
That
gonna
would cost-
I'm not gonna be that far from there.
That would cost more.
Are there any questions that members of the committee might have for Mr. Mizikar, Deputy Chief Colby, about the project? Is there anything else that you gentlemen want to tell us about the project that's not in the memorandum, that's not in the application?
Not really. I know at the last meeting, one of the towns, one of the communities that was brought up was Ashland. So I did reach out to Ashland on, it was after the
do you wanna
historic commission meeting. Yeah. Thank you. So I reached out to Ashland after the historic commission meeting on Thursday, and they connected me with the individual that, from the fire department, that kind of ran that project for them. So he's actually a call firefighter in Ashland, and he's a full-time firefighter in Foxborough. So he's actually worked on multiple projects, because he did one in Foxborough with one of their old apparatus from the 20s, and he did two in Ashland from the 40s. And the list, he actually was the one that recommended going on the site and just kind of essentially Googling it to see what communities. And the list that was included at the end of the letter that you received today was on there. And ironically, that doesn't include either one of those communities. So clearly, there's a lot of communities that aren't on that list. That's just a short, partial list of communities in Commonwealth that have done that. Another department that he mentioned, which is also not on there, was Stoughton. And if you look at the list, there's a lot of, there's a lot of variation. There's from 25,000 up to 130,000, 168,000. So again, it depends on the condition the truck was in at the beginning, and it depends on what level of restoration you want. I actually sent them over some pictures after we talked of the truck that we're trying to bring back to town. And he's like, this might not be a popular opinion, he goes, but I like it the way it looks. He's like, oil it up and run it like that. So I guess when you'd mentioned parade quality, I think that's up to interpretation as well. And parade quality, in my opinion, is not showroom quality, because if it's showroom, you're not gonna want it driving and having kids on it and stuff like that. So I think it just, again, I know there's a lot of interpretation on all of this stuff, but I don't picture what we're proposing and what it calls for the requirements for preservation to really conflict with parade quality, because I feel like it's, again, I think there's some room for interpretation there. But it is, like I said, I guess my point is, I just want to say there are a lot of communities in Massachusetts that have done this, so we're certainly not looking to set precedent or, blaze uncharted territory here.
Seth, but did all of them do it through CPA?
The one, Foxborough and Ashland did.
Okay.
Yep, and some of those, and there's a variety too. Some of them are, I'll call them privately owned, where they're owned through the Firefighters Association or another association or organization. Some of them were owned by the community themselves, which ours obviously would be owned by the community, by Shrewsbury. The other big piece with that too is, like I said, there's such a wide range on restoration, and some of it is condition of the apparatus and at the start and what you want the finish to look like. And then some of those have been sent out to private, restoration, like somebody that does, that's what they do, to be professionally restored from start to finish. Whereas we're looking to restore it, but we're gonna do it essentially in-house, and we're gonna send components out. So we'll have the motor will be professionally rebuilt, the paint and everything will be professionally done, but we're gonna, the management of it will be done locally, so that's obviously gonna be a cost savings there, as opposed to just throwing it on a trailer, shipping it, as you said, shipping it to where it's gonna be worked on, and then having them just do 100% of it, as, project manager and doing the whole thing.
And then breaking it down and putting it back together?
Right, so we're gonna basically break it down and send everything that needs to be done, send it out, and then we're gonna put it back together.
Gail, did you have a thought?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Colby, for echoing some of my thoughts. I think this is really a fantastic opportunity for the community in many ways, not just as a CPA project, because, this is exactly what CPA is intended to do. But it is an opportunity for the community to have a living, moving museum, basically, and to have the expertise of the fire department involved with it is a tremendous asset, because to have it sent out, okay, we can acquire this vehicle, but take it to a restoration guy, and yes, it will cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to do it. But having the expertise of these gentlemen, knowing that they've restored things before, they know what's involved in it, they know the apparatus, I think it's a gift that's beyond what Mr. Treadway has given us, because we have an opportunity to really capitalize on their expertise and their desire and their commitment to doing it. So it's like, I have no qualms about it at all, that it won't be the way that they intend it to be. I do feel as though it should have a preservation restriction on it, so that it is in perpetuity, just to make it all legal. And I know Mr. Treadway's intent is to never have it leave Shrewsbury, but things do happen. administrations change, so you never know. So I'm in favor of adding that caveat to it.
Question.
Yes.
But I think the devil's in the detail of that one, and hearing Mr. Mizikara's comment about whether the preservation is required for this kind of asset, right, as opposed to saying land or building. I think that's worthy, and I wonder if, would you be willing to just say, accept that memorandum of understanding,
Absolutely.
that this is going to be preserved, as opposed to saying literally it's got to preservation, it's got to also, you got to find an entity, it's got
Okay,
to
yes.
hold on to it.
Some
right, so
document
just adds on
that's
to that.
some official document that will specify that this will never leave Shrewsbury
Yeah.
and never be destroyed or whatever, I mean, until it rots away, I guess. Or the next CPA project is restored again, that it is in perpetuity, that as intended. So if it's a memorandum, fine. If it's a restriction, whatever needs to be done, whatever's the easiest avenue, I guess, to make that happen.
Deb, I guess, a question for either, someone out there. In reading Mr. Treadway's letter as part of the transfer, it seems like he's kind of asking for a legal document that basically identifies some of these issues and that Shrewsbury would keep it in perpetuity. Is that something we intend on doing? Is is the town council or some lawyer we have gonna draft something like that so he's satisfied? Is that an intent?
Yes, that is the intent. His letter has been shared with town council, and to the extent that we're legally able to bind the town to something like this with a private individual, or be bound, we would do that.
Yeah, I mean, as a condition of the donation.
Correct, yes.
So that would be really, I mean, I
There
think that
should
would
be
be
something,
very good,
there should be some document that
yeah.
designates that.
So would a document of that sort be able to be executed soon? Or does this body feel that should be a condition for moving forward with this, or just part of what we ask for
Yeah.
in approving the project?
I don't know if it needs to be a part of the warrant article, does it?
Not
need
the
to-
warrant article, but our approval of the project, which is
Oh.
step before getting it to the warrant article.
If I may, procedurally, we do, even after town meeting meets and votes, we do actually enter into a contract with the co-applicant in terms of the actual details of the project progress. Certainly, I think we'd be able to get, a memorandum of understanding
So
or
that
some
would be
similar
appropriate at
document
that
executed
stage.
executed prior to that, but I think that would be another stage that we would be able to, if it's for whatever reason not implemented at that time as part of that execution of that contract,
Right.
for the funding to be released, we could require that as a condition for the funding to be released.
That makes sense, but what does the rest of the committee think? John, your thought?
Going back to the article, we talked about changing the word transportation to acquisition. So therefore, I'll ask this question: could the acquisition cost include the legal fees that we're incurring to do this?
You could.
Could or should, I guess, I don't know.
Yeah, I believe that would be for similar arguments that any legal fees or other documentation would be included in the acquisition costs. I think that the actual acquisition estimate is 7,000 with a contingency for, that amount. So that's why the 10,000 request. Is that
So the
accurate?
transportation estimate that we have now is 9,500. And I don't anticipate, it wouldn't be our intent to use CPA funds for legal fees. We would cover those out of the general operating budget of the town.
Okay.
I don't foresee them being significant.
Question about the wording of the warrant article. If we say acquisition, do you think there will be a lot of discussion about why are we spending money to purchase a fire truck?
There could be, but I think my interpretation is to satisfy CPC requirements as part of, we can use CPC funding for acquisition. We don't necessarily use CPC funding for transportation.
Yeah.
But we could ask perhaps the description that's in the warrant, the layman's term of the article would describe it more fully, as this is part of, while it's being donated, there are costs associated with getting the vehicle actually to Shrewsbury. That might be how we satisfy it.
I would just go back to Jason's comments that the word acquisition, in a sense, becomes all-encompassing, of which transportation becomes part of the acquisition. We're getting it for free, and the transportation is actually the acquisition, or whatever you want, however we word it.
And surely if someone asks a question that's been answered in the presentation of the warrant article, the town manager can answer that question from the stage. It wouldn't be the first time that we answer a question that's already been answered a few times over. So are there any other questions or comments in regards to the project application?
Yes. So,
Go right ahead.
this is a standard question we should be asking for every time we have an article. Do we have funds for this project, and is it a priority? Every project should have that question, and we should discuss it. So, do we have the funds in the account to cover this cost?
We do. I can pull up the actual amount that we have in the historic resources reserves. I don't have that top of mind, but I can certainly pull
I
it up.
believe it is gonna be clear from what was there, but I just wanna make sure that,
I don't
it's
know
from the
how
correct
that's
bucket, historic resources reserve.
Oh,
Because that's also clearly the line, the account that we're saying we want to draw from, right? To make sure that there's enough money in there.
If I may,
Yes.
my most recent calculation is that after the annual town meeting, the Historic Resources Reserve had $155,904 in it.
So by that accounting, the answer is yes, we have sufficient funds available.
Thank you.
How about to the second point of Jason's question, is it a priority? What do you think, folks?
Yes.
Yes.
I would agree that it is, yeah.
Yes.
So good questions to ask every time. Right, we've answered those questions. We have no other questions for the applicant. What do we think, folks? Is there anything else that you want to tell us before? Would someone care to make a motion in regards to recommending this project application?
Yes, I would be happy to do that. I recommend that I move that we recommend the sum of $70,000 for, are we transportation or acquisition? For acquisition?
Let's say
Acquisition.
and
Yes, acquisition and restoration of a 1926 American LaFrance fire engine. I guess that's it, right? Is there more, do we have to add to that?
Chris, do you think there's anything more?
I would add into parade quality, essentially the languages in the.
The language.
warrant article.
According to, have we okayed the language in the article? Because I can just reference that, according to the language in the Article 20.
Just with I think the article as discussed, we just wanted to change, I put transportation, but changing that to acquisition. So it would read, to see if the town will vote to appropriate a sum of money in the amount of $70,000 from the Community Preservation Historic Resources Reserves for the for the acquisition and restoration of the town's third motorized fire apparatus, a 1926 American LaFrance fire engine, to parade quality, with said funds to be under the control of the fire department, and with said funds to be expended before June 30th, 2026, unless the CPC by majority vote extends the deadline or take any action in relation thereto.
Look,
So moved.
Second.
That could be the motion, you'll still need a second.
Yeah, that's my motion.
Can
Yeah,
Is there a second?
okay.
can I
Thank you, Chris.
add
One last bit of discussion?
one? No, I would just like to add to that, add a separate line in the motion that says, and to be maintained in perpetuity, in the motion.
Can we put that in the motion?
I,
Or in
honestly,
the
my opinion, I
contract?
think that's just gonna be in the contract.
Okay. That's fine. I just thought if we tossed it out there, do it, at least we as a committee would have it as a record, but I'm fine with it.
All right, so we're back
All right.
to as is,
Yeah, just
as stated,
that was
okay.
What's hers? I was just making,
Okay. All right.
Those in favor of the motion as stated, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Any abstentions? Congratulations, gentlemen. We will recommend the project to town meeting for funding.
I do have a comment before we move on. At town meeting, what's your intention of, as far as presentation of this project? Is there going to be a formal presentation or just the article as is? I think it would be really helpful for a town meeting to at least have the PowerPoint presentation that was presented, for people to understand the true, gist of it all. That was a little bit of a problem at the last town meeting with people understanding. Chris has got his hand up for it.
Well, I was gonna say, what I'd recommend, being that this is a recommendation from the Community Preservation Committee, similar to last town meeting, our office would handle the presentation.
Right.
Definitely hearing from last town meeting that they wanted some more photos and background evidence. So obviously, we'll work with the town manager's
Okay,
office
great.
and fire department to get that presentation put together, but
Perfect.
unless they'd rather formally present it, I'm happy to
Okay, perfect, thank you.
take that on.
Okay. And I believe we need to also vote on the wording of the warrant article as a separate agenda item. We need to approve. And it's possible that we may move to use this warrant article as drafted by Chris. We have to vote on the warrant
With
article.
the change made?
what I do.
Anyone want to make a motion to that effect?
So moved.
Well, we're changing the word
With the change.
transportation.
Yes, with the word transportation change to acquisition.
Yeah.
All right.
Second?
Moved, seconded, all in favor of the warrant article with the word acquisition rather than transportation. Please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That is done. We have
Look,
our
guys.
regular scheduled meeting next Monday. If there are items people would like on the agenda, Gail, I believe you mentioned something. If you could email me and Chris or tell us now, we can make certain that we have that on the agenda for next week as well.
Are we all set with mine? Okay.
Yeah.
That was the hearing?
If there are any others, we can add that to next week's agenda. Otherwise,
Any others? I missed what we have something coming our way for next meeting? I missed what you two said.
Gail had a question, had earlier spoken of something regarding historic preservation that she wanted us to talk about on an agenda, and I had asked to do it next week.
Introduction. We don't need to go into big discussion, but I wanted to present a program that Springfield has on historic preservation and see if we could think about adopting it for here.
Okay.
Then that would be good
Shrewsbury.
for next week. We'll email the agenda in advance, as well as any documents pertinent. If you have information about that program you'd
Okay, I
like to
can
share in
probably put
advance to
together something,
facilitate the
yeah.
conversation,
Okay.
get that to me and Chris, and I'll get that to everybody. Is there anything else, any other housekeeping, Chris, that you need before next week?
No, I mean, we have a couple items that we were kind of held for that, the RFQ, but I'll push that information back out again via email, so it's kind of top of mind, top of inbox, so.
The agenda needs to be posted by the end of business on Thursday. Today is Monday. So if there is anything that comes up, we need it before then.
I guess what I would like to see, and I know next week it's 1 week only, so even if it's not next week, the meeting after, or any time, is when we had last year's town meeting, we had the funds broken down, you know, in terms of the available funds broken down by the categories. Since then, another year has passed. I mean, we basically got $2 million sitting there. It would be nice to see the buckets and the amount of the buckets, I guess, and, you know, because some of it's spoken for, but there's still a lot in the buckets. And also, I guess I would, personally, I would like to see the stuff that has been voted on, how's it moving along? Have we, like, the basketball courts, I mean, I saw the bid in the paper, the bids have probably been opened. Has any money been expended, or, you know, where are we with the projects? But I mean, you know, seeing we're just starting out, I don't think we need it for next Monday. You know, I know you're busy, but even like for the next meeting after that, or somewhere along the line.
Mhm.
You know, we don't need to get updates every month. I mean, let's see what it looks like first, but once a quarter maybe, something like that.
That would be terrific.
So we have an idea
Good idea.
where we are.
And we can talk about format now that there isn't anything else. That is all of our agenda items except for number 5, which is to adjourn.
Oh,
If anyone would like to make a motion to that effect.
Moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor of adjourning our special meeting, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? And thank you all very much for your time.
Thank you.